Have you ever seen a fuzzy screen on a video or a DVD that wasn't there when you checked it back? Have you ever heard of crackle of static on your favourite CD that seemed to mysteriously vanish when you checked a second time? Did you ever wonder where it went? I used to. But now I think I know. My story begins on a warm summer's day. It was the first year of my university career and I was strolling down the street with some friends. It's funny, looking back. Everything always seems much brighter in our memories. The smiles a bit broader, the sadness a bit deeper, and everything was so much more important. It always is when you're young. I remember we were all in a massive rush to get somewhere, though I can't remember where. Now, when I say massive rush, nobody was running. That wouldn't have been cool. No, we were strolling, enjoying the atmosphere of a new city. All the excitement that comes of meeting new people and just strolling down streets thousands of years old and yet discovered by us for the first time. I think that's why no one noticed it. When you're exploring, you look for the extraordinary. The mundane just passes you by. I only saw it because it was a hot day and the shop next door was selling cheap drinks. But there it was, right next door. Plain and simple and ordinary and utterly, utterly wrong. A doorway with no door, cut right into the brickwork in front of me. There was nothing especially strange about it aside from the fact that it was there. Closer inspection revealed something even more intriguing. This doorway went somewhere. At the other end of a long brick passage there could be clearly seen another door, just like the first but with the lush green of sunlight reflected off foliage poking through it. Well, that did it. I was a city boy and this was just a step too far into the weird for me to be able to resist. I called an "I'll catch you up later" to my friends. I don't even think they heard. And then I plunged headfirst into the alley. The sound dropped. It's the only way I can think of to describe that sensation. It wasn't just that the sound of the street outside was quieter. To me, standing in that little alley, it seemed as though some giant hand had reached up and turned the volume down on the world. Everything seemed softer, more still. It seemed as though I was seeing the world through sepia. It might have been the colour of the bricks, but everything seemed to lose contrast. Where the sound had disappeared, a high-pitched whistling filled the air, almost too high for the ear to detect. I started towards the green at the end of the tunnel, the only piece of the world that hadn't lost any colour. All around me, the bricks seemed to close in conspiratorially. It could have been my imagination, but I could have sworn they were whispering to one another. The green approached. On the threshold I stopped. I still don't know why. Just for a second, I was sure there was someone behind me. I could feel a loneliness there. Something empty and cold. It wasn't hostile. Just sad to see me go. I still wonder what would have happened if I had turned, stopped, gone back. I'm not built like that, though. I don't look back. I took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. What greeted my eyes was incredible. A garden, lush and green and covered with flowers. My initial response was that I'd found Eden, before the sensible part of my brain caught up with the rest of it. Romanticism aside, though, there was something magical about this garden. The flowers were too bright. The tree, also. The green of the leaves was the green of memories. Nothing that could be found in the here and now. If someone had painted the perfect garden, at the perfect moment, from the perfect perspective. This would be it. No matter which way you looked at it, this place was heavenly. I stepped forwards. Strangely, my legs seemed to have lost some of their strength, turning that first step into a trip that nearly left me sprawling. I teetered for a second like a baby learning to walk and regained my balance. That should have been my first warning, but at the time I was too taken in by the beauty of it all. I continued forward, moving slowly at first, but gaining confidence. I came across the church only a few feet into the garden. It was old. The stone that made it up was roughly hewn rock. It looked like granite. Moss grew damply in the recesses of the stonework, and the darkness of the place sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't that I was scared. This place wasn't threatening. It was just old. Old in the way that mountains and forests are old. Old enough that it no longer seemed a work of artifice, but more like some colossal, crouching beast that had grown, fully formed out of the earth. The door was of oak, broad and dark, and surprisingly clean considering the moss on the stonework around it. It stood slightly ajar. I thought about entering, but I wasn't quite ready yet. The air was sweet and warm out here, and for some reason that door felt cold. The slight overhang of the carved stone around it cast the entrance in shadow. It made a stark contrast to the glorious sunshine outside. That darkness, combined with the cold stone surrounding it, put me in mind of a tomb. I turned to my right to see the graveyard of the church. Well, I thought, at least I know the bodies are beneath me up here. I began to walk through it, reading the gravestones as I went. I don't know what part of the morbid curiosity of humanity it is that makes us read gravestones. In a cemetery as old as this, it's not like I was going to know any of them. For me, I think it might be the messages on the graves themselves. All those beloved wives and mothers, fathers and husbands, sons and daughters. I think it's the reassurance that when we're gone, maybe someone will have something nice to say about us. Unfortunately, no sentiment, however strongly felt, can last forever. The first gravestone I reached was so old that the inscription had faded completely, obliterating all but the faintest trace of the memory of the person that lay beneath my feet. I tried the next one and found something still partially intact. Phillips, 6th of June, 1999, 20:51 and 4 seconds. To 6th of June, 1999, 20:51 and 5 seconds. I started up. Something at the back of my head clicked. Something that wouldn't make sense till later. For now, I just took it as a response to the crazy carving in front of me. The grave was newer than some of the others and made of polished black marble. The first name was missing, chiselled away. Maybe it was a sort of joke. My mind raced. What the hell was this doing here? Why put up a fake grave in the middle of such a nice old cemetery? Did they think this was funny? Were there others? I checked the next grave. This one was old and faded, made of what looked like crumbling limestone. Its carving made even less sense than the first. 5th birthday, cutting of the cake, 8th of April, 1989, 17:35 and 42 seconds. To 8th of April, 1984, 17:35 and 47 seconds. Curiouser and curiouser. Then it hit me. Taken in by the strangeness of the grave itself, I'd missed the most important part of that message. The date. It was my birthday. Either this was a fantastic coincidence or... There are moments. The voice behind me made me give out a sudden squeal. I whipped around, not ready to fight. I was too scared to fight. This had all become just a bit too much. I wasn't ready for what faced me from across that graveyard. It was a woman. She was about my age, slim, with long dark hair and blue eyes. She was pretty. Pretty enough to make me blush with embarrassment at my humiliatingly high-pitched squeal. She was also heavily pregnant. She smiled, half laughing at my embarrassment. I felt a chuckle rise in my throat and I had to let it out. I was half laughing at the absurdity of the situation, half out of relief that she wasn't here to kill me. She let me finish. Then she continued. The graves are moments. What do you mean, moments? I asked. Dead moments, she replied. Would you like to see some live ones? I had no idea what she meant. Obviously she was quite mad, but there was something in the way she talked. It was a calm, patient tone, the kind one uses when explaining things to a child, not patronising, but knowledgeable. I didn't know what else to say, so I just said, yes. She smiled. I knew her from somewhere, I was sure I did. She led me to the front of the church again and opened the door wide. A cold gust of air washed over me. It felt as though the door had just breathed on me. I could smell the mustiness of mould and old wood from inside. She stepped over the doorway without a backward glance. I advanced cautiously, my footsteps light on the stone beneath. There was something sleeping here, something I did not want to wake. The dust around me swallowed the sound like a pit, and my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The inside was exquisite. Austere faces gazed down in multicoloured glory from the ancient stained glass murals. Feral grotesques peered at me out of the murk, lurking at the top of their pillars like ancient guardian hounds. The main body of the church was dotted with stone pillars, breaking it into squares. Each square held what looked like an ornately carved wooden enclosure. Box pews, family benches where all the seats faced towards the centre of the square. Beyond the sea of silent wooden fortresses sat the altar, bathed in light. I walked down the central aisle after the woman. She was wearing a long gown that swept behind her as she went, sweeping little wisps of dust from the floor, yet somehow never dirtied by it. I thought she was leading me to the altar, but I was wrong. Nearing the altar, she turned abruptly right, and we stood confronted by another wooden door, just like the first. Strange. From the outside, it had seemed that the church had only one hall to it. This door should open to the outside, but I'd seen no evidence of one. Looking to my right, I saw more doors, stretching to the end of the church. For a strange moment, I thought that maybe they opened onto the stone and was some sort of decoration. Then she reached out and touched my arm. The touch was light, gentle, but the very instant her skin touched mine, it felt like a jolt of electricity had passed up my arm. I jumped in spite of myself and turned to face her. She smiled apologetically. I want to show you something. I've wanted to for a long time, but we won't have long. She walked over to the door and placed an ivory white hand on it. When I open this door, we'll only have a few minutes. Then they will come, and you will have to go. She turned as though to open the door, but I placed a hand on her shoulder to stop her. There was no spark this time, just a tingling sensation. Who are you? I asked. I am someone who knew you, someone who loves you, and someone you would have loved, given the chance, she replied. Turning, she opened the door. Outside was a garden. Not the one I'd walked into earlier, though. The same sunlight and memory green colour filled it, but this was a back garden. The garden was attached to a small semi-detached house. Nothing very impressive, but it looked comfortable, and made all the more colourful by the paintings of a child hung out to dry from a window. The bold splashes of primary colour added an almost carnival feel to the house, like a pale jester. I looked back to my guide quizzically, but she just nodded at the door. A child had appeared there and was fumbling with his sandals. As the 4-year-old careened out of the door at a rate of knots, I only caught a couple of details. The tousle of blonde hair, the blue eyes. They looked so familiar. The child careened into my leg like a freight train and hugged it tight. He was a strong kid, that was for sure. He looked up at me with those blue eyes of his, and again, I was struck with a sense of familiarity. You went away, he said. Stumped for much of an answer, all I could come out with was, no, I didn't. You did, the child continued. Mummy said you went away for a long time, but that you'd come back. I looked at the girl. He's yours? She met my eyes. Yes. He's half mine. The rest of him belongs to someone else. Suddenly something went click at the back of my head. I knew before I even asked the question. Who? He's yours, she said, And everything suddenly made sense. The pregnant woman, the jolt of recognition, the name on the gravestone. Crazily, impossibly, Karen Phillips had come back. I should have realised from the date on the gravestone. That was the night I should have told her I loved her. She'd said it first, and I didn't want to lose her. But I'd only known her for a few weeks. She was my first, that night in the car. She dropped me back at my house before driving home. It was late, so I asked her to come in, but she didn't want our parents to think we were fooling around yet. So she'd driven off into the night, leaving me standing there with the memory of her lips on mine. I planned to tell her the next day. I never got the chance, though. The police stopped by next morning to give us the news. Karen had hit a deer on the way back to her house, causing her to swerve off the road. She died instantly. I never got to tell her. Now I looked up at her. "I love you," I said. She just smiled and started to cry. I got up and we just stood there for a full minute, holding each other, my son tucking himself up against her belly. I had a son. Karen was alive. I couldn't believe it. I just let it wash over me for a minute, then my son wriggled and tugged on my trouser leg. "Daddy, come play with me." "Of course I will," I replied. "But first, Daddy needs to talk with Mummy for a bit." My son ran off, giggling his way into the house. "Are you a ghost?" It was a stupid question to ask, but it was the first one that leapt into my head. "No," Karen replied. "I'm a moment that never happened, as real and solid as you, just overlooked as an impossibility." I could barely choke back my tears. "Why?" She smiled that patient smile of hers. "It's kind of hard to bear a child when you're dead." I had so many questions I wanted to ask her. I still do. Then my son came out of the door holding my hand. I looked myself in the eye for a shocked second. It was an older me, but this was definitely still me. The me of that particular moment, I'd guess. A gust blew by. "Who the—" My other self didn't have time to finish his question. The gust had dislodged a tile from the roof, and it fell with a sickening crunch onto his head. I started forward to help, but Karen held me back. "It's time to go now. They're here." I looked about. "Who's here?" She pointed up at the roof. I looked up to see a static shimmer in the air, so faint it was barely even there. "You remember I said I was a moment that never got to be?" She whispered breathlessly into my ear. "Not all of those moments are as nice as me." My son had already run into the house, and I looked up for a split second into the instant of my own death. If it had had eyes, it would have gazed back. As it was, it just started to move towards me. Karen dragged me through the door and slammed it behind us. Panting, I recovered from my shock. My son was still in there. I ran at the door, but she grabbed me again. It was as though her touch stole the strength out of me. I sat back, terrified. "It's not after him," she said. "Listen, you need to go. You need to get out and be safe." I sat silent for a second. Why did you bring me here? I wasn't angry, but the words came out bitter. I just wanted to meet you, the real you, just for once. She broke down into tears on the last words, and I got up to hold her again. "Stop!" she cried. "Every time I touch you, I take some of what makes you real, and you only have enough for one. I'm sorry." I walked over and sat with her. "Come with me." "Come back with me," I said. She looked up for a second, startled. "Really?" I took her hands and pulled her to her feet, ignoring the nausea this caused me. "Of course. I've been waiting to say what I said in there for 8 years. Do you think I'd just leave you now?" She grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the door. "Then we have to go. That door won't hold them long." I looked back and saw a faint fizzing around the door behind me. The static was coming through. We ran past the doors to the exit, but I was weak. I tripped and stumbled against a door. It swung open. Inside, I could see the cockpit of a car. Karen's car, driving home from that night. And she was crying. It made her cry. She was holding a tissue to her nose that looked soaking wet. She put it down and reached into the glove compartment to get another one. That's when the deer walked out. She didn't even have time to see it. Neither did I. All I heard as the other Karen dragged me away was the sound of screeching tires and crashing metal. It was all my fault. If I'd only had the courage to say it. That didn't matter now, though. I could fix it. If I could just get her back to the other side of that gate. With renewed strength that I pulled from God knows where, I careened out of the church. The garden was full of patches of static now. As we appeared, they started to drift towards us with deadly intent. The silence was intense now, the high-pitched whistling buzzing in my ears like a hellish tea kettle. I could barely stand. I made it to the doorway with Karen just behind me. The dull light of reality was just in sight. If only I could reach it. Go ahead. Karen's voice at my ear. Go ahead. And when you get to the other end, reach back and pull me through. I'll hold them here. I dragged myself down the side of the corridor, using the walls for support, limping for dear life. Every inch forward was agony to me, every movement of my limbs sending sparks of white-hot fire through my muscles. I pulled myself down the corridor away from the whispering bricks and out into the light of day. As I stood on the threshold, I could feel a loneliness at my back. Something empty and cold. It wasn't hostile, just sad to see me go. I still wonder what would have happened if I had turned, stopped, gone back. I took another step forward and realised what she'd done. As I crossed over into reality, my strength returned and I spun around. All I saw was her after-image reaching after me for a couple of seconds, like a negative on a film. I tried to catch her, but she was too far away. As she faded, she called something out, something I would never forget. Watch for the gate. So now I watch and wait. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I don't care. I'll search every corner of this city and every city in the world, every crack and crevice, every nook and cranny, every mundane-looking street for a door that doesn't make sense and a passage of whispering bricks that leads to a garden lit by the green of memory. Maybe then my debt will be repaid. To the mother of my child that was never born. Maybe then I'll get to tell her I love her again. In the land of things that never were.